I'm Steve Etka. I'm Policy Director for the National Organic Coalition. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, what you all may call the other Washington. But I kind of claim both because I grew up from age 10 up through college over in Seattle. And I still have a lot of family in the area. My colleague Steve Ela, and yes, we've been joking about this, Steve Etka, Steve Ela, same middle initial. It's challenging, but we have the unenviable task of trying to explain what's happening in federal policy, organic policy, and equally important, what's not happening right now. But before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the National Organic Coalition is. The coalition was formed back in 2002, really just as the organic standards were coming into play and being implemented. And we realized at that stage that we would need to come together and engage in both legislative and regulatory processes in an ongoing way if we wanted to keep the core values of the organic movement together: ecology, health, fairness, and care. And we needed to keep that at the forefront of the USDA organic program. I think there was a concern about turning the keys to a grassroots movement over to the federal government. And so we very much felt like NOC needed to be there with others to make sure it was grounded. So for more than 20 years, our national cross-sector coalition has been working together to engage in organic advocacy and policy work with members of Congress and USDA and the National Organic Standards Board, or the NOSB. And so we have 14, that changed things, 14 member organizations and more than 40 network affiliates. And our members and affiliates are from farming organizations, high integrity organic companies like Equal Exchange and Nature's Path, food co-op and natural food stores, consumer environmental and certification agencies. And in addition to Nature's Path, other members from the Pacific Northwest are PCC Community Markets in the Seattle area and Organic Seed Alliance based out of Port Townsend. And the Tilth Alliance is a NOC network affiliate. So as you can tell, we are very diverse as a coalition in terms of the perspectives represented. And we're unique in the sense that we operate by consensus, which can be a pain in the butt from time to time. But what it really means is that all of these different subsectors of organic are coming together and when we move forward with policy recommendations to Congress and USDA, they've been vetted through all the different subsets of organic. So that's important to us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the congressional legislative side of things. And then the other, Steve, I'll be talking a little bit about the USDA and National Organic Standards Board work that we're doing. So just kind of a quick recap, I guess, of I'm going to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about the dysfunctional appropriations process that we've just come through, the related federal government shutdown, the impacts of the shutdown, kind of looking at the SNAP food stamp program as an example. Really the hot off the press deal in Congress to reopen the government, the status of the Farm Bill, and how all of this relates to organic policy. Because of a partisan shutdown in Congress, the federal government shut down really starting October 1st until just about a week ago. And actually even more recently. And until about a week ago, there really was no clear path for reopening the government. And to recap a little bit on what happened, in the House, the Republican leadership was able to pass what we call a clean continuing resolution at the end of September to last until November 21st. And that was really to kind of kick the can down the road and keep the government funded until they could pass new full-year bills. With a few exceptions, the vote on that was largely party line. And after passing that bill, the House recessed and really left town for 7 weeks, in fact. And that shifted the attention to the Senate. And the focus was entirely on the Senate during this last 6-week shutdown period. And so they stayed in session for 6 weeks, voting over and over and over again on the same House proposal to do a clean, temporary extension of the federal government. And while Republicans control the Senate, where they have 53 Republicans and there are 47 Democrats, unlike the House, where a simple majority vote wins, in the Senate, you need a supermajority of 60 votes to get most things passed. So this usually means that the parties need to find a way to reach across the aisle and find compromises to move legislation, but that doesn't always happen quickly. So during this 6-week shutdown fight, the Senate Republicans, like their counterparts in the House, were really just insisting on just extending the funding from previous years. And the Senate Democrats, in contrast, really wanted the package to include a permanent extension of the Affordable Care Act, enhanced premium subsidies that were enhanced during the pandemic, but are scheduled to expire at the end of this year. So Democrats really had been feeling burned by the partisan process that had happened this summer with the reconciliation bill. You may have heard about the One Big Beautiful Bill that really was used to enact President Trump's agenda on tax cuts, but it was done and paid for with cuts in federal economic and nutrition safety net programs like Medicare and SNAP, which we used to call food stamps. So I'll say I don't know that I have ever seen the partisan distrust in Congress to be worse than it is right now. So since the Republicans control both houses of Congress and the White House, the Senate Democrats were really using the little leverage that they had left, which is the filibuster power in the Senate. What I was referring to earlier is the 60-vote margin required to get anything done in the Senate, to try to force the Republicans to permanently extend the enhanced healthcare premium subsidies. So the congressional Republicans and President Trump were really steadfastly opposed to this idea, even though many of the Republicans themselves do have constituents who will see big healthcare premium increases at the end of the year if they don't do something. What they were saying is, gee, we're willing to have the discussion, but not as part of reopening the government. Once we reopen the government, we'll have that discussion. And because of the distrust that has developed over the last year, the Democrats just didn't trust that that would be the case. So for 6 weeks, neither side in the Senate really had the 60 votes they needed to move forward and get the government reopened. So during that 6-week government shutdown, most federal staff were furloughed, and a great number of federal programs were paused. And Steve Ela is going to be talking a little bit about in a bit about what that means for USDA and the National Organic Program. But I wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about how the Trump administration was able to use its power during the shutdown to very selectively cut programs of importance to Democrats to put pressure on them to vote to reopen the government. And I think the SNAP, formerly food stamp program, is a good example of this, because on November 1st, the administration stopped sending out nutrition assistance payments under the SNAP program to 42 million recipients, citing the government shutdown as the reason for doing that. And this is really in spite of the fact that there was a contingency fund that had been created by the Congress to keep the program funded given this or other occurrences. The administration was under multiple court orders to start sending that money out, and they largely defied those orders and appealed their decisions all the way to the Supreme Court, really to put pressure on the Senate Democrats, saying, this isn't going to happen unless you vote to reopen the government. So this is just one example of the pressure that the Senate Democrats were under to vote to reopen the federal government, and there are many other examples of that. So last weekend, 8 Senate Democrats crossed the aisle and joined with all but one Senate Republican to agree to what is a very complicated package of agreements to reopen the federal government. And that passed just narrowly by the vote of 60 to 40, which is, as I mentioned, the minimum vote needed to move in the Senate. And then the House followed suit and passed that package deal on Wednesday, and it was also signed by the president that night. So the government is reopening now. So the deal includes a short-term continuing resolution until January 30th for most federal agencies, passage of what Congress calls a minibus. Minibus is opposed to an omnibus bill, so it's kind of jargony language there, for 3 full-year appropriations bills, including the agriculture bill, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It reverses the layoffs and furloughs of more than 4,000 federal employees that were laid off during the shutdown. It requires them to be rehired. It requires them to get back pay. That's the normal procedure in previous shutdowns for them to be paid for the time that they were furloughed. But the administration has been saying, gee, maybe we don't need to do that. So this agreement requires that to happen. It also requires the resumption of the SNAP program funding. It extends the Farm Bill, for another year, which I'll talk about in a second as well. And there is on this healthcare premium subsidy issue that was the big ask for the Democrats. There's an agreement to have a Senate debate and vote in December on extending those premium tax credits. No agreement on what the outcome of that vote will be, but that's now the big discussion going on in Congress. So let me talk a little bit about what these decisions mean for organic. So as part of that deal to reopen the government, there was a trio of appropriations bills, the agriculture bill, military, construction, and VA, and legislative branches bills. There's 12 bills altogether that need to be passed. So this was a package of 3 that were passed after months of separate bipartisan House and Senate negotiations between top appropriators. And all of the other federal agencies are not covered by the 3 bills that are not covered by those bills are only funded, as I mentioned, through January 30th, which sets up the potential again for another shutdown on January 30th if people aren't satisfied, for instance, with what happens in December on that healthcare debate. So this may not be over. I will say for agriculture and the other agencies in that 3 full-year bill package, the minibus, if there is another shutdown, it will not apply to them. So agriculture will not be affected by that. So the agriculture appropriations bill that was passed as part of the minibus includes level funding for key organic and sustainable ag programs, including $22.8 million for the National Organic Program itself, $7.5 million for the Organic Transition Research Program, and $48 million for the Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program, the SARE program. So the downside of this is that in the case of all 3 of those programs, they are addressing needs that are growing. So the fact that those programs have been stagnant for several years is a problem. But unfortunately, in the current climate of cuts in federal programs, level funding really is considered a win these days, as evidenced by the fact that the bill made big cuts in programs like the NRCS Conservation Technical Assistance budget, which it's not a very sexy budget, but it is the money that allows NRCS to be working with farmers in putting together their plans and implementing all the various conservation programs. Cuts in the Office of Urban Agriculture, cuts in the Grasslands Conservation Initiative, and then cuts in a number of local foods and farmers markets programs as well. So, back to my earlier point, level funding for the organic and the SARE programs is actually good relative to that, but it's still a big problem. The deal to end the shutdown also includes provisions to extend the Farm Bill, which expired technically at the end of September of this year. The bill extends the Farm Bill for another year to September 30th of next year. One thing I wanted to note that's of concern about the Farm Bill extension is that it didn't really extend everything. For example, the bill failed to extend the payment limits for the Environmental Quality Incentive Program and for the Conservation Stewardship Program. And the concern here is that it really paves the way for really large operations to consume disproportionate amount of the scarce conservation dollars. I will say that the traditional Farm Bill process in Congress has really been disrupted. The traditional process is to pass a comprehensive Farm Bill every 5 years. And the Farm Bill covers funding for traditional farm support programs, crop insurance programs, research, conservation, organic, as well as nutrition programs. In fact, 85% of the spending in any Farm Bill is always the SNAP program and related nutrition programs. A lot of people are surprised by that. So by including provisions of importance to farmers in rural areas, as well as nutrition programs of importance to more urban members who don't have farmers in their districts, this has always allowed for a really strong Farm Bill coalition in support of this broadly inclusive package. So this process and the traditional coalition that's been formed over the decades to support that process has allowed Farm Bills of the past to be passed in a bipartisan way. But the regular Farm Bill process is largely broken down this year, has broken down. First, the last Farm Bill was passed in 2018. And instead of passing a new Farm Bill in 2023, which would be the regular timeframe, Congress has passed a series of one-year extensions of the old Farm Bill at the end of 2023, then again at the end of 2024, and then again this week to kick the can down the road another year. So this means that many of the Farm Bill provisions from 2018 are really getting a little old and need to be dusted off and updated. So there are many Farm Bill ideas, including many that we have for organic, that really are in limbo because of the lack of movement on the Farm Bill. So now the next chance to pass a full-fledged new Farm Bill will be in 2026 at the earliest, and even more likely probably in 2027 because it's often very politically challenging to pass a Farm Bill during an election year. So there's a lot of folks that are thinking that it probably won't even happen until after the midterm elections at the end of 2026. So the second reason things have broken down a bit is that the traditional bipartisan Farm Bill coalition that I talked about has really been shattered at this point by the distrust arising from the partisan budget reconciliation, one big beautiful bill that I mentioned earlier that happened earlier this summer, where some Farm Bill provisions, particularly and mainly the commodity support programs, but to be fair, a few organic programs as well, were funded through that package, a package that the Democrats didn't support because it also slashed safety net programs for Medicare and SNAP. And so one of the organic provisions that was included in the reconciliation bill was a provision to reauthorize the National Organic Certification Cost Share Program that you all are probably familiar with from fiscal year 2025 last year, because there had been a lapse, all the way through fiscal year 2031, so 6 years, providing $8 million in mandatory funding annually. And unfortunately, the fiscal year 2025 funding for the program was never distributed to the eligible organic operations, or hasn't been yet, which has resulted in a significant net increase in annual certification costs for U.S. organic operations. As a result, organic farms, especially small and mid-sized operations, are carrying the full cost of certification out of pocket, which is really eroding their margins and forcing some even to postpone renewal or to scale back. And in our view, this delay runs counter to the administration's goal of bolstering domestic production and really risks accelerating the loss of U.S. organic farms. So we're urging USDA to move forward both with the fiscal year 2025 cost share funding, which is now late, and the 2026 funding as well, as soon as possible. And we want them to do it using the reimbursement rates that were established in the 2018 Farm Bill, which is 75% of annual certification costs up to $750 annually per certification scope per operation. The reason I mentioned this is because, yeah, go ahead.
Quick clarifying.
Yeah.
When you said the administration has a goal to increase production, do you mean specifically organic production that they've seen?
Well, yes. I mean, we're making the point, they're making the broader macro point about, gee, we need to be growing U.S. production and cutting back on imports of products included. But they're also saying that to a certain extent in organic, not enough from our view, but we're making the point that organic is another example of where we can and should be doing more to meet growing consumer demand of organic with domestically produced product. I obviously can't do that with coffee or some other products, but for instance, organic grains, we're great at producing grains in this country. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we have to be importing a lot of organic grains. So we're trying to make the organic subset argument about the broader administration goal of, relying less on imports and more on domestic production. And we're saying that's true in organic as well. So that's kind of the point we're making. The reason I mentioned the reimbursement rates is that, as many of you all may know, when the funding for that program runs short, in the past, those reimbursement rates have been cut, which has been really hard on farmers, particularly small and mid-sized organic farmers. Many of the other Farm Bill programs, though, including many organic programs, were left out of that reconciliation package because they didn't meet what are very esoteric budget parameters needed to be included in that bill. So the Republican Ag Committee leaders, particularly in the House Agriculture Committee, the Chairman G.T. Thompson there has pledged to move what people have been calling the skinny Farm Bill, or the Farm Bill 2.0, to address the remaining Farm Bill items that were not included in the budget reconciliation bill this summer. So in that context, National Organic Coalition, NOC, we sent a 10-page Farm Bill 2.0 recommendation letter to the four Agriculture Committee leaders, the two in the House, the two in the Senate, laying out a bunch of our arguments for what should be included in that Farm Bill 2.0. And House Ag Committee Chairman Thompson has really been trying to get his Farm Bill 2.0 package done, at least to get it voted out of committee by the end of this year. But given that the Farm Bill was now just passed again or extended for another year, it really means there's no chance that that's going to happen this year. And as I mentioned, probably more likely 26 or 2027. Just to give you a few highlights of what our requests were to the committee for the Farm Bill 2.0. Back to the cost share issue. The $8 million a year that was provided through the reconciliation bill is not enough. We knew that even in 2024, 2025, that probably wouldn't be enough to cover the growth and demand for the program. So we're asking them to augment that funding with some more funding in the Farm Bill 2.0. But we're also making the argument that the reimbursement rates that are, I mentioned before, the 75% and up to $750 per certification scope is too low. Those numbers are very old, and certification costs have really gone up significantly since those were set. So we're asking that those reimbursement rates be increased to $1,500 annually from the current $750, and that the Farm Bill provide additional mandatory funding to fund that. The other thing we're asking for is increased funding for the National Organic Program. So as we talked about earlier, the NOP is funded through the appropriations process, but the Farm Bill has to authorize the committee within parameters to do that funding. And the House Ag Committee's inclination to date has been just to say, let's keep funding for the NOP level for the next 5 years. And we're arguing strongly that as the organic sector grows, so too must the agency that oversees the organic sector. And if we don't do that, we're risking the integrity of organic. We're risking not having enough staff at NOP to crack down on fraud. So we're looking for those, as previous farm bills have done, to be stair-stepping up the funding authorization for the NOP. We also want more funding for organic research. In the last Farm Bill, one of the big wins is we, not just NOC, but many organizations, Organic Farming Research Foundation, for instance, is a NOC member who's very engaged on this issue. And we were able to get that, the flagship organic research program, OREI, up to $50 million a year. And that's for technical reasons, that's a really critical number, because that means if there's a lapse, if the Farm Bill lapses as it has, that funding level will continue. Our argument is we need it to go up further because the production challenges that U.S. organic farmers are facing, many of them we think can be addressed through more research. And if we're stagnating on the research tools, we're limiting, back to the earlier point, the ability of the U.S. to meet domestic production needs on organic as the demand grows. And we're really ceding many of those markets to imported products. So we see the research as being part of that overall narrative. The other thing we've really been asking for is for USDA to be able to, as they have been doing, make cooperative agreements with NGOs and many organizations like Tilth and others who have expertise in organic. Because we hear so often from the frustration from organic farmers that when they go into USDA offices, they're met with staff that don't really understand organic. And so our point is that USDA should be helping to fund NGOs with expertise in organic to do a lot of that technical assistance. It's a little like one aspect of the like the Transition to Organic Partnership program, the TOP program, that Tilth and NOC and others have been participating in. This is one example of the type of things that we think Congress should be authorizing them to do. So, important point here is, under the Biden administrations, a lot of this work was being done, but it wasn't formally authorized or required through the Farm Bill. So we would like to have specific language in the Farm Bill to allow some of that work to continue. Really, another part of meeting the goal of growing domestic organic production is giving USDA the resources and the direction to address organic supply chain challenges that have been that really have hindered our ability to grow domestic organic production. So in some ways, this is more on the supply chain side and on the processing side. And this is very similar to what was done previously under the USDA Organic Market Development Grant Program. And so we're asking for those concepts to be authorized through the Farm Bill. Another thing that we've been pushing is for provisions in the Farm Bill to increase USDA funding for what we call seeds and breeds in shorthand, to make sure that farmers really have access to the animal breeds and the cultivars that are ideally suited to their farming systems, to their changing climates, to their cropping systems and their soils, so that they're better suited to what farmers need, and that you all have the ideal seeds for your operations. And we're also asking that USDA be given the direction and authority to do increased risk-based residue testing of organic feedstuffs, given the ongoing fraud that we're seeing, particularly in imported organic feedstuffs. And this is really to build on top of the anti-fraud framework and procedures that are already in place, recently finalized under the Strengthening Organic Enforcement Rule in the last administration, which actually started initially in the first Trump administration. So there has been bipartisan legislation introduced in the Senate called the Organic Import Verification Act, OIVA, to do just this. And so this is focused on feedstuffs. There is some discussion about whether or not that needs to be broadened to other areas of organic ag as well. And lastly, we want to have a provision in the Farm Bill to authorize USDA to have cooperative agreements with states and tribes to connect local farmers with local food distribution organizations. So these are just a few examples of the many organic provisions that NOC believes should be in the Farm Bill 2.0 whenever that starts to move. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to the other Steve. There, I'll just leave it up. Are you done the shift button?
Or the arrow key one. So yeah, Steve 2, Steve 2.0, I don't know. But so just to give a little clarity in the sense of, I know when I'm a full-time farmer, so I'm an organic grower in Western Colorado with tree fruits, peaches, pears, apples, and things, and then I work part-time for NOC in the capacity I'm going to describe here. But I know when I was outside the process, it was always a very hazy thing. What's the Farm Bill mean to me? What does NOP, National Organic Program, mean? So the Farm Bill and the federal legislative stuff that Steve is just describing gives us the vehicle. So it authorizes all the other stuff that I'm going to talk about to happen. So we need the Farm Bill, we need these appropriations, we need these things from Congress to then enable USDA to do the organic program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the administrative side of this, and then get down kind of deeper into the National Organic Standards Board and such. So one of the biggest things, and we can go, I think, to the next slide, Steve, is that in all this churn in the federal landscape, and with all the reduction in force and resignations and people taking deferred retirements, the National Organic Program, which is what administers our organic program as growers, lost a third of its staff. So they went from 85 to 55 people. This was a program that was not overly staffed anyhow, and as Steve has said, organics have been growing. We're a $74 billion industry. That's up quite a bit. And so the National Organic Program has also grown we've tried to help increase its funding to try and keep pace with that. Because the bigger the industry, the more you have to address really critical issues that we all care about. And I'm just going to ask you, if you were going to name 2 big issues we care about right now in organics, what are they?
Fraud prevention.
Fraud prevention. What else? Access to organic, getting people into the organic system, barriers to accessing organic. So those 2 things we've really got to deal with. And so as things go up for fraud prevention, we need more people out there in the field checking operations, checking certifiers, checking for residue testing and whatever. So when we lose a third of our staff, now we're hamstrung. So this is a big concern. And so we really want the oversight and enforcement to keep pace with the growth. We can go to the next slide. The other thing is, you've probably heard about the reorganization plan for USDA, where they want to move a lot of people out of DC into everywhere else. The National Organic Program staff already is very remote because a good chunk of the staff is remote. There are a few people in DC. And so we're advocating, we want to keep those people in DC because they form kind of the centerpiece for all these remote staff to work. And honestly, even though DC seems a really long way from here, if NOC has a fly-in or we bring farmers to Washington to talk to USDA, it's a lot easier to go down to DC offices and sit down with National Organic Program staff than to have to go to Fort Collins and Salt Lake and everywhere else. So there is, we're advocating that there is some benefit to having some core staff there, and that, decentralizing this program that's already very decentralized would be problematic. Let me go to the next. The other thing that we've seen is in the shutdown, most USDA staff are furloughed. The organic program continues regardless. We're still growing things. Handlers are still producing things. Imports are still coming in. This doesn't all stop because the government shut down. And so verification, import fraud, coming back to that, bringing new people into the fold, when the government shuts down, we lose all that. And so NOC is now trying to make the case that some of these federal employees should be designated as essential. And essentially the way you do that is essential employees have to be expressly authorized by law, they have to, or implied by law, or they're required to protect life and property. Well, in the case of organic fraud, our case is my business depends on integrity. If we have fraudulent the product in the system, my business is impacted. So it's important that these, at least some key positions, are designated as essential. Right now, the government's reopened, so it doesn't seem as important. But as we've seen, and as Steve has said, as we have this more very partisan politics, it's likely we'll have further shutdowns at some point in the future. So we'd like to lay the groundwork that at least some people in the National Organic Program stay on, monitor the system, protect us all. And it's also, these are things that are required in the Organic Foods Production Act. So it is actually in the law that these people need to be doing these things. Okay, let's drop down a notch. Legislative, USDA, National Organic Program. How does the National Organic Program decide what to do? What does our organic certification look like? And one of the very key things in that is the National Organic Standards Board. The National Organic Standards Board, does anybody know what it is? Yeah, okay, I served on it for 5 years. Did I know what it was when I got on it? Yeah, so steep learning curve. But the NOSB, National Organic Standards Board, is a federal advisory board that is designated in the Organic Foods Production Act from Congress to advise USDA, specifically the Secretary, as to what organic standards should look like. So it's a really important board in terms of determining where our program goes. The NOSB has a couple very key functions. It's the authority over the national list. Who knows what the national list is? A few, yeah. But as a grower, I don't care about the national list, I care about what I can use on my farm. And the national list designates materials that can be used, synthetic materials that can be used in organic, but just the material. Most materials are made in a product formulation. So this is why we have OMRI, or we have Washington State Department of Ag, or what we call material review organizations. And they review those products to see if they meet compliance with the things that are listed on the national list. But the national list is the initial thing to allow us to use something. Organics are based on two premises. Natural materials are okay, unless they're prohibited. So what are natural materials that are prohibited? Strychnine, nicotine, things that are really toxic, but still naturally occur. So those are prohibited, but everything else that is naturally occurring, we can use on our farms, we can use in handling, no problem. Sometimes it gets tricky, what's natural, what's not. This comes back to those material review organizations like WSDA and OMRI. That's where we go and say, hey, you have the expertise, can you review that for us and say, yes, this is probably okay or probably not. Synthetics. Synthetics are prohibited in organic production, across the board, unless specifically allowed. And this is where the NOSB becomes very important, because the National Organic Standards Board has to review a synthetic material, whatever it may be, a form of copper that is, copper is naturally occurring, but the way it's processed may make it a synthetic. Sulfur, there's lots of things we use in beekeeping, there's lots of things we use in handling. Some of those materials are essential to organic production. There is no natural alternative. So the NOSB has to review those, and only only if the NOSB says they're okay can they be added to the national list. So it's, even though they're a federal advisory board, this is a very unique power that the board has. And so they have to meet, they have to review these substances, they have to approve them. Nobody else can add them to the national list without that. So this really affects, that review process affects us as organic growers as to what we can use. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those materials here in a little bit. So having this meeting canceled because of the government shutdown, it was supposed to be last week. Can't hold a meeting with the federal government. The federal government's not in session. The National Organic Standards Board meets twice a year. One of the things they do is to look at all these materials on the national list, and they are required to review them every 5 years. Should this material, synthetic material, stay on the list? Is it still necessary? And if it is, keep it on the list. If it's not, kick it off the list. Well, if you don't meet, you can't review those and vote on those in 5 years. So this is a really, having that meeting canceled really derails that process. We also have some other very key topics that the board is reviewing that I'm going to talk about in a second that really impact us as how our organic system works. The other issue is if we just delay these votes until spring meeting, the board consists of 15 people, 5 farmers, 3 consumer advocates, an environmental advocate, a scientist, a certifier, I always forget, handler, a couple of handlers, yeah, so a pretty diverse system. 15 people, 5-year term, 3 people should be appointed every year, but because of resignations and things, it's asymmetrical. So 5 people are going off the board as of January 24th. 5 new people are coming on. And when you're talking about very in-depth kind of nuanced discussions and you drop 5 new people in and you're asking them to vote on something they've never worked on, it becomes very problematic. So we're concerned that we lose the experience of these 5 people going off. And I'll be honest, some of them I agree with, some of them I don't, but they know the topic. And so it's important, we think, for those people to be able to vote on those substances. So one thing NOC is really pushing for is that we will try and hold an NOSB meeting virtually before these board members rotate off. We'll see if it happens. It's kind of a long shot, and we may be faced with all those votes getting deferred to the spring. But it really affects how our organic program looks. So let's talk about, come back to the NOSB, some of the organic integrity issues on a big scale. Risk-based certification. So our organic systems plans, the way we conduct business, have looked the same since 2000, more or less. The way we have an annual inspection, we submit our organic systems plan, our certified looks at it, that has all stayed the same. And as organic has grown, there's a question now, should we put the same number of resources into the operation that has passed every inspection flawlessly for 25 years? Should we be looking at them with the same scrutiny and spending as many resources inspecting and looking at them as an operation that has consistently been non-compliant? It's consistently right on the edge of things. And should we be looking at them more? Right now, our system doesn't really enable that. And so there's a lot of discussion about, do you look at risk and say, oh, these people are a split operation, so they could have more of a chance of commingling. Split meaning you've got a conventional and an organic side. This operation has a lot of imports. This operation buys a lot of products that versus an operation that doesn't buy any products. These are different risk factors, and you then put more time into an organic systems plan review and an inspection in those higher risk categories than the lower risk ones. And if you do that, you take a chance that somebody plays the game and looks really good on paper and in fact is a high risk, and then how do you identify that? So these are a lot of the big discussions going on. The National Organic Standards Board has a proposal out right now on how we would look at this risk-based certification. Residue testing. We're hearing a lot about that with fraudulent imports, right? So if we test those and they come back hot for whatever prohibited material, glyphosate, some kind of handling material. What do we do with those? Right now, we don't have a prescribed formal testing program to really test a lot of those imports. And so there's a bill that Steve is working on, Organic Impacts Verification Act, that is looking at that, but also the National Organic Standards Board is looking at that, of how do you implement that? What does testing look like? What happens if you have a hot test comes back? What's the process that you follow up with that? Do you just go, oh, bad dog? Or do you say, wow, we're going to follow it down a process because some certifier certified that product originally? Was there a breakdown in their system? And is that certifier acting correctly? And how do we follow up on it? So it's not just a one-off, but we're actually trying to change the system to help prevent these organic integrity issues. E-commerce. How many people buy things on the internet? You ever buy anything that is organic on the internet? Yeah, come on. How do you know it's actually organic? When you walk into a brick and mortar store, you walk into PCC markets, you pick up the label, it's got the USDA seal, it's got the certified by. Do you always see that when you're buying on whatever e-commerce site? You see the product, it says organic jam from Steve Ela's farm. You go, oh, it says organic, cool, buy it. The jar comes, doesn't have any of those things on it, doesn't have the certifier, doesn't have the seal. How's that feel? Not good. But how do you verify as a consumer, as you're buying it, that when it says it's organic, it's organic? And this is kind of the wild, wild west right now. And it's like organic was in the 80s, where you had a bunch of different certifiers, all with different certification methods, each with their own seal, and you trusted that certifier A had as much integrity as certifier B. Well, when we're talking about e-commerce right now, the word organic is used all the time. And there are a lot of fraudulent products out there that people are buying unsuspectingly, and they either realize it when they get it or they don't realize it at all. And then when they feel dissatisfied, that's a black eye for the organic world as a whole. So how are we going to regulate e-commerce? What are we going to require in terms of labeling an e-commerce site? Those are big skill issues. Let's come down to materials. We talked about the national list. How many people use compost? What's your opinion on synthetic compostable packaging? All those paper plates, all those cups. Okay, I see, yeah, shaking head, thumbs down. Well, let me play devil's advocate. Wouldn't allowing those in organic production and to be used as a compost feedstock, wouldn't that help close the loop? Wouldn't that help close the loop in all this packaging that's going to the landfill? Yeah, it would. But, okay, here's the rub. And this is NOC's position. This is something that the National Organic Standards Board has worked on for 3 years. There was a petition to the National Organic Program to allow these synthetic compostable feedstocks, and remember, synthetics are prohibited unless specifically allowed. So there's a proposal to allow these synthetic materials as compost feedstocks. Sounds like a great idea. Except, if you start looking at the science, as these materials break down, they create microplastics, they create nanoplastics, and those are not regulated. And if you look at the standards for compostability, those standards were written before we knew about microplastics and nanoplastics. So this is a case where a standard that you look at and say, was that compostable? Did it biodegrade? Has not kept up with what we know about PFAS chemicals, microplastics, and all these other things. And so a lot of the research shows like the standard says, if you compost something, it has to break down to less than 2 millimeters. 90% of the material has to be less than 2 millimeters in size. That says nothing about degradation. It's really saying about disintegration. And that's a nuance. So we can still have the plastic, it's just really small. And so this is where we have a disconnect between what we know now about environmental science and what was designed. And so NOC is really concerned that if we allow these synthetics, that we're actually going to be contaminating organic land as we spread that compost. And so this is a big issue because on the surface, it seems like a really good way to close the loop. Yeah, like love compostable package, except on the details, it could be just another issue like biosolids, where we had heavy metals, or we had PFAS contamination. We're really concerned that putting this in organic compost will actually hurt us, not help us. And that's a really good example of the National Organic Standards Board having to make a decision of whether to allow a synthetic material on 3 things: human health, environmental health, And is it essential to organic production? Is there no other alternative? And in this case, essentiality fails because we have organic compost already without these materials in it. So there's a very viable alternative. Health, we potentially impact human health with microplastics and such. And environmentalism, so it fails all three. And so we're hoping the board will deny this petition, and say, no, we can't use these things.
Just a quick question on the NLSB. So do they decide this on their own, or is there a public process where both can weigh in?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So, great question. Yeah. Is that 15-person board in a silo? No. And the really cool thing about the National Organic Standards Board is they bring in public comment. So when they meet twice a year, they publish materials. There's a 30-day opportunity for all of us, you, me, to write comments and say, yes, we think this is a good idea. No, this is a bad idea. And so my job with the National Organic Coalition is to write comments to the National Organic Standards Board on behalf of our NOC members. This is a really powerful process. This is the chance for you as the organic community to change how our organic standards look, to give input about how you feel. And honestly, serving on the board, individual comments, like I comment for NOC all the time, holds a lot of power at the board. Organic Trade Association does too, but when you write individually, huge, because you took the time out of your busy day to say, this material, this process matters to me. So and the board reads, they get about 1,500 comments, board meeting. The board reads them all, they discuss them, and then they take their votes. So this is your chance, even though it seems very esoteric and kind of removed, this is your chance to shape how you want to see things happen in terms of what the board is doing.
And Steve, I think it's also important to note that there's a supermajority vote required for each of these decisions as well. It's a 2/3 vote.
Right. So if they want to approve something or unapprove something, it has to be a 2/3 vote, not just a simple majority. So a 15-person board, 10 people have to say we don't like this, or we do like this. So it's really actually a pretty strong process and kind of unique within USDA. Most of the other federal advisory boards do not have this power. And most USDA programs don't have this conduit for public comment. So it's why the National Organic Standards Board meetings are really important, and it's why the public comments are really important.
Quick question, Steve. When you mentioned the petition process, can you just talk a little bit about how that works? I mean, I know the sunset rule applies, so you're going to review things every 5 years regardless, but when a product or a system is up for petition, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, well, let's look. Okay, Parester is the next one here. That's a great example. Thank you for leading into that. No, it's a great example. So Parester is something that is used for insect monitoring. It's an attractant, especially for lepidopteran insects, the moths. I'm a fruit grower, so for worms and apples, it's a moth. I can use a combination of pheromones and Parester to get a sense of how many are out there. Parester naturally occurs, but to make it commercially, it's synthetic because you just can't isolate enough natural Parester at an economic cost, but you can formulate it. So it's before the board as a synthetic monitoring tool. The board is in favor of it, except that one of the uses you can put it in microencapsulated plastics and spray it out. Oh, microplastics again. So the board is actually annotating it to say only for use in passive dispensers, not in microencapsulation. But how did the board decide to even talk about this? And this is your question. The manufacturer put a petition in to the board saying, would you please approve this synthetic for organic production? Goes through a process. The board gets what's called a technical review, a third-party literature review, so they can verify that whatever the claims in the petition are true or not true, gives them something to discuss, and then they evaluate it, write a proposal. We have chances for public comments, and then they vote on it, yes or no. In this case, I think it'll probably pass, but with that narrow annotation. So not for not to be in microencapsulated. So does that answer?
Yeah, are most of those petitions from companies, or is it?
It could be anybody. Sometimes it's a group. A lot of them are from companies, but sometimes they could. NOC could submit a petition if we so wanted, if it was something really important to us. Takes some time, takes some effort, but and the NOSB also can get things, not so much materials, but the bigger policy things on compost. That actually came from the National Organic Program. They said, we've got this petition, we would like you to advise us. So we're going to kick it down to you for you to give an opinion to us of how we should decide on this proposal. Risk-based certification, that kind of comes down where the program said, help us out here, engage the community. Let's have a massive brainstorm on this and figure out how to move forward. So that's where the NOSB is really, really cool, I have to say.
Who makes the final decision?
The final decision is the National Organic Program or the Secretary of Agriculture. I mean, ultimately it's the Secretary has the power, but the board advises them. So the board makes a recommendation. We would like to see risk-based certification move forward. Whether they do that then is up to the program and really up to the Secretary when it comes down to it. So this is where it gets messy. The board is only advisory, except for that one thing where you can't add a material to the national list without the board saying it's okay. But that is their one real power, but everything else is advisory.
But even when it gets to the National Organic Program, there's one more chance for public comment, right? So
Yeah.
they say, we were advised, this was the recommendation, here's the proposed rule, and then the public has one.
Yeah, so I was going to say this in the final slide. It's a two-stage process. The board makes a recommendation, all this public comment, but then to go through federal rulemaking is a whole nother process, and that is a whole nother set of public comment. So board makes a recommendation, says, hey, USDA, let's strengthen the Organic Enforcement Act. We think this is a really good idea. They write the rule, they publish it, it's out for public comment, and based on that public comment, then they make the rule or they don't make the rule. Pet food and mushrooms is one that they just passed that went through the federal rulemaking process last year. So standards for pet food, standards for mushrooms. That came from the National Organic Standards Board and then was published, had more chances for public comment, and then now is an actual rule, although there's some questions about that. So we don't need to go through all these, but like oxytocin is one in livestock. Used right now, it's allowed, but it's not narrowly annotated. And there may be cases in the 2 or 3 days postpartum where oxytocin might want to be used. But a lot of the livestock producers, especially dairy, advertise no hormones. So some of the big dairy processors actually ban the use of oxytocin because it's a hormone. But there may be, from an animal welfare standpoint, within those few days postpartum, an allowance. So they are actually proposing to change the annotation. It's allowed, but to narrow it, say you can only use it 3 days postpartum and then can't use it anymore. So that's just trying, again, from an integrity standpoint and consumer standpoint of what does organic mean, let's try and make these standards as narrow and as tight as possible while still maintaining, if there is an essential use, we can use it. Cornstarch and glycerin, those are processing materials. Those have been on the national list for quite a while. Right now, the board, if they had met, were recommending to remove them from the list. Why would you remove them? Because now there are organic materials that are available. So there's organic cornstarch, there's organic glycerin. So we no longer need to allow the synthetic use. So it's if it was allowed, it got us across a bridge. Now we have organic production. Take them off and make sure you have to use the organic products. And then the final one, and this is in the weeds, except it's really important to all of us. List 4 inerts. Doesn't that inspire you to get up and say, wow, I really want to learn about this? Yeah, I thought so. Where are they? They're used in every organic pesticide formulation. So you have the active ingredient, which is approved on the national list, and you have all the inerts. And in a lot of formulations that I use, the inerts are 90% of that formulation. They're synthetics, so they have to be allowed. But they're allowed under this blanket listing of list 4 inerts, which refers to a defunct EPA list that has no longer been updated since 2004. So a new inert material can't be added. An old bad inert material can't be taken off. And a lot of these inerts, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but some of them are carcinogens. They're endocrine disruptors. And they're not disclosed on the label. It's just inert ingredients. So I may be making a choice for an active ingredient I think is really safe, and 90% of that formulation could be an inert material, maybe not so safe. So this is something that the board has recommended some actions. It's ready for rulemaking, going through that second process to either individually list them or refer to another EPA list. NOC thinks they should be individually listed because do we want good or bad materials in there? So it really is in the weeds, except it's really important because it affects all of us anytime we use an organic material that's formulated. So. And then finally, just future work. Steve mentioned organic seed usage. So there's a requirement to use organic seeds unless they're not commercially available in form or quantity. Form, specific variety. Quantity, enough to plant. And so organic seed usage has actually been stagnant or going down, even as organic production increases. This is a real concern because one, we want to use organic seeds because growing organic seeds is another expansion of the organic marketplace. It protects more land. And so we're trying to crack that nut, so to speak, of how do we encourage organic seed use without hamstringing us when there aren't enough organic seeds available. And this is a really difficult program because you can't just force it because sometimes they're just not available. But in cases where they are available, a lot of people work around and get the exemption. So this is a process issue and a fairness issue and an integrity issue that is very nuanced and very, very difficult. And so we're all talking about that. Induced mutagenesis talks about excluded methods, and that's how we breed some of those organic seeds. Fermentation, pickles, beer, everything, that's all cool, except that fermentation is now being used to produce lots more things, using engineered bacteria to produce lots of acids and lots of things that you would never expect. And so this is a way that excluded methods creep into organics. Swine is one. We have the organic livestock and poultry standards, which addressed a lot of issues, but swine were largely left out of that. So in terms of animal welfare, we need better rules on swine production. And then I'm just going to say screwworm, the old world screwworm coming up from Mexico. A lot of cattle get moved around from Texas to the rest of the US. So this is going to be an organic problem, not just a conventional problem that we need to pay attention to. So we already talked about how rulemaking happens. The cool thing, organic is an opt-in program, right? It's voluntary. Nobody has to be organic. But if we opt in, we want strong standards to protect our integrity and to prevent fraud. And so this is one of the things we're trying to make with Congress is, and in this anti-rulemaking environment, is organic producers actually are asking for rulemaking because that's how we protect our system. And organic integrity is crucial, and we depend on strong rules. And I'm just going to end it at that, and we can have some questions. I know we're about out of time, but do your thing. Comment to the NOSB. Reach out to us at NOC. We'll help you do it. We work with, like say, Tilth Alliance is a network affiliate of ours. We're happy to help this process, but don't be shy. It seems like a lot of work, but you actually can make a difference.
Do y'all have any questions for us? Anything that we need to know?
I do have a question for you. With your board there, how many chemists and biologists do you have? And it was the oxytocin thing was pretty startling. And I don't know how you would tell the difference between applied oxytocin or endogenous.
Yeah, so the question is, how many chemists are on the board? Well, there's one scientist that is a seed, but you know that's very large. But it's amazing. The people on the board may not be chemists, but it turns out they learn really quickly. And they're provided, these technical reviews provide a lot of background information. And so there's some of them that there were like chelated materials got really technical and made your head hurt. But a lot of them, you actually can reach out to external resources to have it be explained. And the board's pretty good at that. And the other thing in this public comment process, people aren't shy about telling the board, like, hey, here's the details on this. And you're like, oh man, okay, thank you. But so that's part of where that public process comment process comes in.
I don't know if this is the right place for this question. I just went through my certification process, and with the risk-based component, I'm a small grower, and the inspector said one of my deficiencies is the labeling of my harvest crates. And she said, you know, this is where NOSB needs to hear from you. Where is that process?
That's one of the things we're talking about in this.
So letter writing now is.
So if you were a split operation where you had conventional or organic, that becomes super important.
Sure.
Label your harvest crates. If you're all organic and you're only delivering to a farmer's market, maybe not so important. So that's kind of trying to figure out, you know, where do we balance this of to the nth detail or what is actually important? Brenda, you.
Sorry, I can't help but chime in on this one. This is a challenge that we have as certifiers. I'm Brenda Book with the USDA Organic Program. A challenge that we have with how rules are written and when do we take that authority on as a certifier to decide you don't have to meet that rule. And then who are the operations that do have to meet it. So risk-based certification is something we have always done. Our inspectors spend more time on those larger operations, those operations with higher risk. That's just, that has always historically happened. But now we're talking about it in a more tangible sort of way, but we don't quite have the tools and the guideline of where do we make those calls. Because you can see the danger. Suddenly, all certifiers are deciding this is a risk, this is not a risk. And we have differences. What does that do then to the organic integrity and that trust in that label? So that's something we're all kind of working through right now with USDA of where is that line? Because we don't want to put you guys in a bad situation where one certifier is holding you accountable because we think this is a risky area, and then another certifier has decided that's not that, you know, we're going to allow you to not follow that part of the rule. It's also where it becomes really important how we write these rules, because when we write these rules in a really prescriptive way, that makes it challenging for us to ignore that requirement. And with some changes that happened in the labeling piece of it, in an effort to strengthen that organic supply chain and that traceability, it was written in a very prescriptive way to say, you know, all non-retail labels must have these 3 elements. But it doesn't say only if you're a high-risk operation. So our growers are unfortunately kind of stuck in the middle of this as we are all trying to have these discussions and figure things out. When USDA put out these changes in the regulations, we saw them at the same point that everybody else did. There was not this time for us to ask all these questions and kind of figure that out. So unfortunately, we're all kind of learning this together, having these conversations together. There are going to be stumbling blocks where we're like, wait, we think this is risky. Oh, you don't. Let's talk about that. Let's come to those agreements. And so I think the non-retail label part of it is such a good example, Anne, of where, yeah, for an all 100% organic operation, why do you need to put the word organic on every label? But yet the rule doesn't give an allowance for us to just ignore it. And it would be very dangerous for certifiers to suddenly start ignoring parts of the rule inconsistently.
Because you want to make sure there's uniformity between certifiers, so we're all certified to the same standard. So it gets dicey, and also remember that certifiers are audited by the National Organic Program, so they come in and say, did you do all these things? So they're like trying to figure out where that fits.
How to get on the same page.
Yeah.
But you touch on a really good point, which is one of the tensions that we're always dealing with in terms of law and regulation for organic. One example, a number of years ago, there was just this broad requirement for organic dairy and livestock that animals had to have access to the outdoors. And everyone thought, you know, people know what that means, you know, certifiers can be flexible on that. And then we saw all these big dairy operations coming in that really were skirting the standards, or, you know, on chickens, for instance, they were having second floor porches where they could technically wander out, but it really wasn't actually real access to the outdoors. So on the livestock side, then we worked with USDA to put in what became a pretty rigid and very strict set of rules about what that means. And so it's hard if you're too general, then you have a lot of people that are taking advantage of the loopholes. If you're too strict, then it makes it really unnecessarily cumbersome. And I think that's the place we are right now with the strengthening organic enforcement rule. We've been hearing that when NOP has met with certifiers, they've said, look, you guys are overthinking this. You don't have to do it quite in that way. But then when certifiers go to get accredited by a different part of NOP, they want you to be really rigid in checking all those boxes. So it's kind of a tense moment on that right now, and it's just part of the growing pains on what is still a pretty new program, frankly.
Yeah. And I want to make sure you had a question too. I want to make sure we get to you.
Yeah.
So I have an organic mushroom farm. I use inputs. And one of the challenges for me is that because I am purchasing organic inputs, my costs are a lot higher to the consumer, and I can't compete with conventional mushroom production. And you talked a lot about funding. The cost share program is great, but for me, the cost of certification is really nothing compared to what I purchase organic inputs. And I've also been involved in organic processing, and it's similar to making organic product, purchasing an organic input. I'm just curious if there's any talk of like subsidizing or offsetting the cost of organic inputs so that organic farmers or processors and handlers, probably more so, are able to compete in a market. And I think that like organic should be accessible to all income levels, and at this, unfortunately it's not in a lot of cases. And so I'm just curious if there's like any talk of that, of kind of I would love to see something that makes organic foods comparable or competitive to conventional foods.
I don't know of anything for helping with input costs, because where does that money come from? It's really, and then how is it ascribed? But on the flip side of that, there is a lot of work of trying to really say, why is the organic label important? Why is it different? Why is it worth this extra cost? And one is no other label is verified. No other label is inspected. No other label has legal distinction, whether it's regenerative or natural or anything. Organic's unique in that. So we're trying to work more on the value add of it. And the accessibility issue is a big one. And I think we're all trying to wrestle with that and figure out how to make that work. But we also know the conventional system is highly subsidized. So it's maybe not that we need to subsidize the organic system, it's just we don't need to subsidize the conventional system. And that, obviously these are all very long-term games. They're not going to be solved overnight. But we hear what you're saying. And also in the mushroom, the mushroom standards were an attempt to make sure that how you grow your organic mushrooms is more defined, so that somebody, right now the mushrooms, different certifiers look at mushrooms differently, and so where you're going maybe to the gold standard, somebody else might not be. So we're trying to make sure that you get to play on the same playing field.
We appreciate them doing that now.
Yeah. So
Time for one more? Well, I was calling, but we can do two more.
My question is if you've seen anything that might benefit organic growers from the so-called MAHA movement. It seems like it should be a good fit, though it seems like it's all over the place. But I'm wondering if you've seen any actual progress that might benefit organic growers.
It's something that we feel the need to be cautious about, because the macro point that's being made as part of the MAHA discussions is about the need to have access to good, healthy food. And we kind of appreciate that there is that discussion going on. What's been interesting to me is that there's a lot of, one of our struggles in Congress has been that we don't have many Republican champions. We have a lot of Democratic champions. We argue that it really should not be partisan, that the organic community is a full spectrum. Many farmers are conservative, many are liberal, and so it should not be that way, but it has been a struggle. And what's been interesting is there have been a couple of newer members of the House Republicans, for instance, who have come in and feel the connection between the MAHA perspective that they espouse and organic, because they see that as another example of healthy food. So that discussion is going on. I think the tension gets to be there where, some people are concerned about some of the statements that are made in the MAHA realm that don't have a factual base. So that's where we need to be a little careful about sort of just fully embracing that. But the discussion's going on, and we have seen some new Republican House members who have jumped on board of support of organic with MAHA as their angle. So there's some benefit there. And then should we do one last one before we
Yeah,
break
go
up?
ahead. We have,
Yeah.
We have a little extra time.
We can keep going.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, definitely.
What, did you have your hand up in the back?
No, I was just scratching it.
Okay.
Well, you won the bid.
I have another one. I don't want to go too far in the weeds on one question, but I work with organic farmers, and I work a lot with composting and commercial compost industry, and I am just like bewildered by the compostable plastics. And I mean, I understand the rules as they currently are, but I know it's very confusing for farmers. And I guess I'm curious, like, how did this happen? And I'm not sure how we get out of it. I mean, because I would imagine there's tons of pressure from municipalities and composters to say, just allow it already, and our lives will be so much easier.
And you're right. I mean, so the question is, there's so much pressure coming in on the composting issue and these synthetic compostable plastics. If we just allowed it to be easier, the reality is actually it wouldn't be. And that's part of one of the arguments is right now, just the reality is there's non-compostable plastic and compostable plastic. And if you're sorting a stream of waste coming in, it's almost impossible unless you look at the little thing to tell which is which. So the composters now really are pretty much sorting out all the plastics regardless, because some aren't, some aren't. Now theoretically you could make them a different color or this or that, but the other problem is too is there is not a national compostability standard. They're private certifications. So this particular petition was submitted by bioplastics. BPI, bioplastics industry. I may have that wrong, but they're one certifier of composting. This is compostable, but there are others too. And so we're talking about a national rule, and just to refer to one private standard that could be changed tomorrow without any public input is dicey.
When this happened? Like, when did the NOSB say that? Like, when did it go into practice that compost that had that was not allowed?
It's because so coming back to that tenant, if it's synthetic, it's prohibited unless allowed. So those are synthetic materials, so they're not allowed unless there is a formal process to allow them. So they're just not allowed.
We've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah, but and it gets into like biodegradable plastic mulch. Not a similar argument.
It's so messy because it's compost, which has always been allowed.
But in organic, there's only one thing that's allowed as a synthetic feedstock, and that's paper with certain restrictions. So everything else, it has to be a natural source.
Compost that WSDA registers, we require those manufacturers to have a system to separate these things. And so that's been consistent. If it's a registered product, then we are verifying that they have a way to make sure those synthetics are
not mix those in. So it is messy, but I think this is a lot of these issues aren't black and white. I mean, and I used to say with I was a conventional grower, so we started to go organic. People would like, well, I believe in organics, except that they should have allowed this or they shouldn't allow that. And ultimately, I just say it's all the gray area. I mean, there's so many gray areas, and at some point you have to draw a line. And that line is somewhat arbitrary, but yeah, you've got to draw it. And then you can argue, well, it should have been here, it should have been there, but there's a line. And a lot of these arguments are around where that line should be. But basically, because those are synthetic materials, they're not allowed until they're specifically allowed. And because we think because of the way they're currently being made, because, I mean, just think about paper plates. Like when I grew up, you know, you put your food on the paper plate and they got soggy and they went plunk. And all the advertisements were like, oh, the better paper plate. Well, now most of this compostable packaging doesn't get soggy. Why? There's plasticizers, and then that's where some of them were made with PFAS materials because they're water repellent. Now those are being phased out, but there may be some other plasticizers. So that's our concern, is that it's no longer just paper. In fact, the allowance for paper as a feedstock, the NOSB is looking at reviewing, because paper has gotten more complicated, not less complicated. We use soy-based inks, but actually there's a lot of plastic fibers in paper now to reinforce it. So, you know, old paper was maybe more natural than new paper. But this is where, you know, things have changed. The board tries to look at these things and adapt with that.
This may be more of a comment than a question. It's kind of specific to fresh market produce. As a handler, distributor, some of what SOE put into place has drawn some of those lines that you're talking about and made things a little more black and white for a certain set of rules, which frankly makes things a lot easier for us. You know, the less guesswork and more certainty we have about compliance makes us able to go about our business a lot easier and be more effective. You know, the last thing I want to hear an inspector say is the way I interpret the USDA's rule is this. You know, we want there to be certainty, and this is the right way, this is the wrong way. FSMA 204 that's coming up, I believe next year, is going to address a lot of the labeling issues that we're talking about. And this applies to conventional, organic, whatever it might be. Yes, the word organic will have to be included in that label, but I mean, labeling is going to have to get pretty specific next year, down to lot, harvest date, all sorts of stuff that, you know, we're already trying to kind of wrap our heads around the traceability aspect of that. So, you know, to be compliant with that FDA guidelines and regulations, you know, that's going to make you de facto compliant with the organic regulations, I would think. I
mean, as a specialty crop grower, the food safety standards far exceed the labeling, the traceability that organic does. The organic stuff for us pretty well falls out from what we have to do for food safety. So that concurs. But I think, you know, we see a wide variation in how well people comply with those, and especially if they're exempt below the sales value, even though they're supposed to comply, we know, you know, it's fuzzy there. So, but you're right. I mean, the food safety stuff is, to me, much more of a headache than organic. So. Mike?
I have a partial question, partial comment. I was thinking about this mushroom subsidy input thing, and so I was thinking about like messaging and advocacy and how to balance the right messaging. Where we go to DC, we go to our state legislators, and we are talking about how we want money for cost share. We need money. Producers, you know, won't stay in business if they don't have this. And then at the other side, we're saying you should support organic because organic farmers are more profitable, they have higher margins, they have this premium. So like, what's the right balance? How can we achieve something like what you were saying when we're also saying like, oh, we're so much more profitable and you have these organic hotspots and it brings all this money into the community. So like, where's that balance, or how do we navigate that when we're out there advocating?
Yeah, welcome to my world. That's a tense spot. You know, one of the things that we've been pointing out lately is that actually the number of organic farmers is going down in the United States. It's going up in other parts of the world. Organic acreage is going down here. It's going up in other parts of the world. So we look at that mixed with the fact that organic sales and consumption is growing. And so those two trends cross at a point that means more and more imports. And so that's kind of the way we talk about that, is these programs, whether it be research or cost share program or fixing supply chain problems, are all a way to make sure we can bolster and grow organic production domestically so that we don't have to rely so much on imports. The question that you're raising is one I'm always dealing with. We're always talking about, gee, this is a wonderful opportunity. A lot of conventional farmers should look at going into organic because they can keep, more of their profit, but then, we see so many examples where that's not true, and where, we're losing organic farms. To be fair, we're losing farms in general. It's not just organic, but that's a shift. Organic had been growing in terms of number of operations.
Do we know, where those anchors are going, whether to development or conventional or uncertified things like beyond organic or regenerative, which we've talked about a lot in the last couple of days here at this conference?
I don't know that we do know that. At least I don't know that. It's a good question.
I mean, we know, like Steve said, we're losing farms in general. I mean, I don't think the loss of organic farms is unusual in terms of the loss of all farms. But where they're going, I don't know. I mean, we know there's consolidation, even in the organic world. But
Is there a concern that people are falling out of the organic program into one of these non-certified?
I mean, this is when we talk about risk-based certification or things, and NOC is, I mean, we've got a call. You're welcome all to sign up. It's an open public webinar on Monday. And we usually have a big meeting before the NOSB meeting. Well, that got canceled, so we went virtual. So go to our website. We should have had that up here. And you can sign up. And one of the big talks about is, do we need to reimagine what certification looks like at this point? Has organic grown so much that we've outgrown what worked really well for us? Or do we need to tweak it? Do we need a whole new car, or do we need just a tweak? And that is we're going to have breakout sessions. That is actually one of the topics right now we're trying to open up. And it addresses kind of this question of, many farms, I mean, I wouldn't still be here if I hadn't gone organic. I'll just be honest. Organic certification saved my farm. That gave me a market niche. But if we have fraudulent products that are cheaper, I mean, so this is if we have non-integrity, then that undermines that profitability. So this is where I think some of those two things come together, is we need this because we need to protect the integrity. If we have integrity, then maybe we can have more profit.
There was a question here, and then Mike, did you have your hand up?
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
had a question, back to your presentation, for the Farm Bill 2.0. You listed all these wonderful ideas, but then you also said that it's not gonna happen until 2007, 2008. So what kind of paradigm shift or different ways of approaching, if we know that it's not gonna happen? And I think one of the examples that you just talked about is your call on Monday. It's organic. Do we do it differently? Because if you can't afford to become organic, you're not going to be organic. You're just going to fall off the list.
So it's a good question, because every idea that gets into a farm bill or gets moved in legislation takes years of work. In terms of advocacy. And one thing I didn't talk about is one way that we do that advocacy is called marker bills, where you work with members of Congress to introduce a specific idea, and then you try to use that legislation as a rallying cry to get other members of Congress to co-sponsor it, to get advocates to talk about it. And the idea is that bill the hope is that would become part of a bigger omnibus bill, like a farm bill. But the problem we're having is that you can't just say, oh, gee, they're not going to do it this year. You have to keep talking about this stuff, because as soon as you stop talking about it, it just drops off the list. So it takes years of constant dialogue on all these ideas. And frankly, we have a lot of marker bills that we have been actively engaged in, and some that we're just supporting. And the fact that there's more and more and more of those makes the point to Congress that this 2018 Farm Bill needs to be updated. We can't just keep bumping the same bill down the road for another year. There are all these new ideas, as evidenced by these marker bills in Congress. A lot of energy for updating in a macro way the farm laws that we have. So even though it may not be happening this year as we thought it would, and may not even happen until 2027, we got to keep doing this, and there will be more and more marker bills. And that, to me, that is the message to Congress, that you all have to do something.
And that's, I'll say, this is, OTA has a lobbyist on the Hill, NOC has Steve, Organic Farmers Association has a lobbyist on the Hill. There are a couple others, but it's where, paying these people to do what I never want to do is really important.
Doing it from time to time, by the way.
But we need those people there all the time. That's knocking on the doors, and it's expensive, but it's critical.
And Mike had a question for you.
So I see my time to Ann first, and then if there's time for all of us.
I just want to say, probably most people in this room do not know how much work being on the NOSB is. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Yes.
It's a huge amount of work.
Thank you.
I agree.
I can't follow that.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments, especially as it relates to this. I had the privilege of going to the NOC fly-in in DC this past year, and it's how do we change this with our politicians? What is the messaging that resonates with them? And I think that there was, 25, 30 of us that were going around from different states knocking on doors. We had 70, 80 some meetings with elected officials. We got together at the end and it was what worked, what didn't work. And I think the whole competition part, fairness was a big thing. Well, first and foremost, anytime a farmer knocks on a door, they're oh, you're a farmer, we want to help farmers, whether you're Republican or Democratic. So the idea that these different groups, NOC, the Organic Trade Association, Organic Farmers Association, I think the disturbance that Valerie talked about and the systems being turned upside down has made those three groups work together more closely than they have in a really long time. The OTA does more market research on organic, and they've projected that it sounds like a $74 billion industry right now, that it'll grow to $144 billion industry in the US by, I think it was 2032. And so there's an appetite for organic in the United States, especially among Gen Z and millennials. And the message of they're gonna get it, but is it gonna be produced here or is it gonna be imported from overseas? That definitely has a competitive spirit going in the elected officials. So I think that fair. I don't know the answer to what obviously the conventional industry is freaking ginormous, and I don't know what percentage of subsidies is going percentage wise, but I think the message about it's a growing sector. If we want it to grow here in the US, we need to support it proportionally to what we're doing for conventional. This is a legitimate agricultural industry in this country, is resonant in a way. And if there are farmers here from Okanagan, Douglas, Grant, Benton, Yakima, or Klickitat County, anybody? No? Well, we have to find them because Dan Newhouse, who represents the districts of those counties, is on the Ag Committee. He's the only Republican to have voted to impeach Trump that is still in office. He's also the co-chair of the Organic Caucus. He was an organic hop farmer in Yakima, and he has a huge influence in organic policy nationally. And so I think that, getting constituents to comment and to talk about the importance of investing in organic is important. So.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning Congressman Newhouse, Mike, because given where we are, that's very important to mention that he is a very strong advocate for for organic and is one of the co-chairs of the House Organic Caucus. The new one, in addition, is back to the MAHA question, is Congressman Tony Weed, brand new congressman from Wisconsin. And we asked him if he would be a co-chair, joining Dan Newhouse to be another Republican co-chair of the caucus. And he said, yes, but just so you know, I'm coming at this from MAHA. That's my angle. So thanks for mentioning Newhouse.
But I'll say, and Mike mentioned our fly-in, but even locally, and this is where, I mean, I know, I feel this way. It's like I get really nervous to go knock on those doors or talk to our representatives, senators, because it seems like they have the power and we don't. You're their constituent. You have every right to knock on their door and tell them what you think. And if you think organic is important, knock on their door and tell them that. And don't be shy. And I'm talking to myself here too, but you know, it is not that you're speaking to power. You are their constituent. You have the right to do that and let them know that. And it makes a difference because it doesn't take that many people consistently to say something like, I keep getting these calls. So just that's another call to action. Don't be shy.
Sounds like, and there's a lot of knock puns going on here, but sounds like we have time for one more question, then we'd have to wrap up.
Yeah, maybe just really quick, we understand how, you know, if we're a grower, how do we get products out into another country, but could you just really quickly like talk about if a product's coming in from another country organic, is it NOP that does handle that, or does it go to individual certifiers?
It's really the certifiers. I mean, and this is not my area of expertise either. Mike, you can probably address that.
I'm trying to figure out the best way to answer that, but so there are other standards in different countries, and then there are equivalent standards, so like Canada and the US has equivalency, US and Europe, but the certified, and you can become certified to the USDA standards in other countries. And so the USDA actually has an accreditation process where they accredit the certifiers who are administering that standard and that certification work in the other countries, right? So like,
So similarly to how they would accredit a US-based certifier.
yes, yeah, they have a whole team. That's when Steve was talking about people being in remote locations. There's someone in California that's on the accreditation team, and she flies all over the world and does audits on these certifiers to make sure that they're administering the standards the same way, the inspections are happening fairly, blah, blah, blah.
And I'll say one of the key things in that though is, yeah, it's certifier to certifier, but then it's up to the NOP to make sure the certifiers are doing their job.
Yeah,
and so one of the things that's really happened in the last 7 years or so is USDA is working a lot more closely with Customs and Border Protection. And this is where, you know, sometimes we're really grumpy about how the USDA administers the organic program. But if it were private, you would not have this access. So now they are integrating databases. So then when CBP, Customs and Border Protection, gets an import and it's got an organic certificate, they can verify it right away and see if it's a fraudulent certificate or a valid, or if there's questions about it, they can impound it. So that newer work of USDA to work with CBP is huge.
So there's different layers depending on the country and the standards and the equivalency. But essentially, if it's going to come in and have that USDA logo and use an organic product here, it's got to be certified to either equivalent or USDA standards, and then it's all accredited. So it's pretty tight system.
Should be, I mean, but that's where we need the money to make sure it stays tight. And the interesting thing is they actually trademarked the logo just recently. I mean, it was, you know, who needs to trademark the organic logo? It's a US thing, except that just like, you know, you catch the drug smugglers on tax evasion, not on drugs, that trademark, having a trademark means if a product comes in and it's got the logo on and you can't find the paperwork, they can immediately impound it on trademark infringement. And then you let the organic process play out. So sometimes you help solve the problem, not directly down the middle. But that's just kind of a fascinating, you got to be creative.
I think we need to let you all go.
Yeah, let's have a round of applause.